Welcome back for another hololive video. So, I've been a little bit away, but I might as well do this before I do any more content, since you guys are probably wondering, if you have been sticking around me, how do you actually play this game? Well, maybe not. Maybe you've already looked up the quick start guide and everything, but if you haven't, that's what I'm here for. So, I'm actually going to tell you how to play the game now, finally. Finally, we're going to actually learn how to play. So, let's get into it. This is the flow of the game, how to play. If you've already looked at it, then hopefully this clears up any questions you might have. And if you haven't looked at it, well, welcome to the how to play video. So let's get started. First, I'm going to give you an introduction and disclaimers. First of all, this is a card game very similar to Pokemon. I've been saying that a lot of time in the last few videos. So if you're coming from Pokemon, this should be easy to pick up. It's a pretty sequence-heavy game, just like Pokemon, and it has middling to low combo potential. I would say it's even lower combo potential than Pokemon. There aren't really any crazy explosive turns, I would say, in this game, compared to Pokemon even. And of course, it's never going to hit the same level of combo potential as something like Yu-Gi-Oh!, for example. And it also has pretty much no interaction on your opponent's turn, just like Pokemon. There are some, but they're pretty limited in scope, and the range of effects you can do on your opponent's turn is basically only like one or two different effects. So with that in mind, even if you haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon, or as Pokemon, just Pokemon, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't really match up with this game, then I would say this card game is still not that hard to learn, since Pokemon itself is, I would say, pretty simple to learn as a card game. This is pretty similar in the learning curve. And of course, if you can, instead of just watching this video, you should just go out and play with people who already know how to play the game, okay? That's the easiest way to get into the game and learn how it works. I am blessed to live in Japan, where that kind of culture is pretty normalized. So you can just kind of do that on any given day. But if you live in a pretty secluded area, this might not be an option available to you in person. That's why you have things like Holo Delta, which I will be using in the future for some videos here and there. But yeah, you can always join up on the Discord, which I don't have a link to it, but I'll think about putting a link in the description and stuff like that. I don't know if I can do that though, because I'm not really a part of the organizing team. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get into the how to play, the part you're actually here for. First of all, let me show you the game board. This is from the Quick Start Manual, so if you've seen that before, this should look very familiar. This is exactly how the board works, and I've shown it like once in a video of mine before, although I think that video doesn't have that much reach, so I'm showing it again just for clarity's sake. You got a lot of different parts, but the basics parts of it are your cheer deck goes in the bottom left, your main deck goes in the top right, your holo power goes above your deck, your archive goes below your deck, and your life points go above your cheer deck. And then you have a bench and an active spot and a Collab spot and a holo mem position. This is all hopefully not very hard to understand, so I'm just going to move on from here after that. Okay? And I'm going to be referencing these kind of like as we go along, but you know, once you see it in person, it's not that hard to grasp, I feel like. This is probably the least complicated game part of the rules, I would say, for most people. Aside from maybe like two phases, but yeah, we'll get to this. Next, I'm going to explain the turn structure and flow. So I'm going to breeze through this here. We have 6 phases in the game. Yes, we do call them phases, just like in Yu-Gi-Oh! So this is like maybe one part that's similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! There are a couple of different steps you got to follow. First is the reset phase. This is a phase that is actually skipped on both players' turn ones, which is only relevant once set 4 rolls around, so you don't have to worry about that for a while. And even though it does technically have a situation where that matters in the current format, I would say that situation is still fairly rare. Next up, we have the draw phase and cheer phase. Those are pretty simple, and I'll explain those in a sec. The main phase is after that, and that's where all the game pretty much happens. And then you have a performance phase, which is your battle phase, and an end phase, which is, you know, an end phase. And once you start to play in-person events, which is probably the only way for you people to play in person at this moment, you can play Holo Delta, but it's not really the same. You should still declare whenever you move to the next step during your turn. This avoids confusion for your opponent. You know, good communication, as every card game really demands you to do. So let's talk about each of these phases in great detail. So let's start with the reset phase. I'm going to use the quick guide here to show my visual here. But basically, this is the phase where you move your Collab holo back and you unrest them. So you can read all this stuff. You can read all this stuff in the box, but honestly, I'm just going to say here that you just need to unrest all of your holomem. So you untap them, and then you need to move your Collab holomem back to the bench or back position, and then you need to rest them or tap them. That indicates they cannot do anything on the next turn. And then you can replace an empty center with a back holomem if your center holomem is currently empty. More on that way later in the video, but for the moment, that's the reset phase. Again, you skip this on your first turn, but this is a pretty normal step. But this happens before drawing, so very important. If you catch your opponent drawing a card before they do the resetting, you should remind them to reset before they do anything else, because it kind of matters in some cases anyway. All right, moving on, we have the draw phase and cheer phase. Very simple stuff. Draw phase, you draw the top card of your deck. This is the same for every card game pretty much. Everyone loves drawing cards, and top decking is some of the most exciting things you'll ever do. And you can use this information from your draw to inform your action in the cheer phase. And what's the cheer phase? Well, this is where you attach your cheer from your cheer deck to your holomem. And this happens immediately after your draw step, so you can't perform any other actions, which means you actually need to think about where this cheer goes, because I've played several games where I've just been like, all right, I'm going to autopilot, attach this cheer to my front holomem, everything's going to be going Gucci fine, and then later down the line when I'm playing the turn, I'm like, oh wait, I should have attached that somewhere else, but now it's too late because I've already passed that step, so now I'm in the main step. And yeah, so you got to think about this a little carefully sometimes. You can't redo this once you start moving into your main phase, so you really just got to think before you settle on a cheer attachment. And they do use send as the keyword in this game, which is a little annoying for me, but you'll commonly refer to me as attaching, just like in Pokemon, or putting it somewhere or sticking it somewhere. I think send is not a very good term for this, but that's the term they use in the card text, so just bear with me on that one. All right, we're zooming along. Let's keep going. Now we're in the main phase. Now this is where most of this presentation is going to happen, because this is the biggest step. You can do any of the following actions in any order you like. There is no set order. You can A, put debut or spot holomem onto your backstage from your hand, or from your deck if you're using normal PC. That's a different card effect, but basically this is just the same as some other things. I'm just gonna go through them first, and I'll compare them and contrast them later. But you can also bloom holomem, which I've talked about before, and we'll talk more about that in a second because that's gonna be more detailed. You can also collab holomem, which is the main gimmick of the game. You can use your Oshi Skill or your SP Oshi Skill if you want to. You can play support cards, and you can baton pass. So these are all 6 of the possible actions they list in the quick start guide. I'm not sure there's more outside of this right now. I'm pretty sure there's not. So everything in the game currently falls under this umbrella of things to do in the main step. Now, if you're coming from Pokemon, some of these might seem pretty familiar to you. So I'm going to tell you what each of these corresponds to in the Pokemon card game. The first one, A, is benching basic Pokemon. And you can just do this from your hand, or if you play a card like Buddy Buddy Poffin or Nest Ball, you can do it from your deck. Pretty simple. Maybe there are some abilities in Pokemon that allow you to put Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench. Same deal here. There might be a card that just says, all right, put a debut from your archive onto your bench. I don't know if that card actually exists. I'm pretty sure it doesn't. And if it does, it's not very good, since most decks have a substantial amount of debuts to supply their game plan. Next up, we have Bloom. This is the same as evolving Pokemon, so if you're familiar with that mechanic from Pokemon TCG, this will largely feel familiar to you. Collab is the only one that doesn't have a corresponding mechanic in Pokemon. That's because Pokemon currently runs single battles in TCG, but I think back when double battles were experimented with, you kind of had a similar vibe going in that format. I'm not an expert on that. I wasn't playing a TCG back then, so someone else in the comments or someone can tell me more about that if that's similar or not. D, use your Oshi Skill or SP Oshi Skill. This is basically the same as using your V-Star ability or attack. More like a V-Star ability, to be honest. Because the Oshi Skill is more like it's a tied to your Oshi holomem, so it's always available to you, but you can only really use it like once a game or once per turn, something like that. So yeah, you can also play support cards. This is the same as trainer cards, so any trainer card you have in your hand, you can just play them as long as you can fulfill the requirement to do so. And finally, Baton Pass's Retreat, which I've already covered in a different video, so I'm not really going to touch on that too much. All right, let's move into the more detailed stuff. The stuff that's more akin to what you might be asking about if you already knew all the basics of the rules coming into this video. In B, Bloom Holomem, we have a couple of rules that I need to set for you. So, first of all, just like in Pokemon, the Holomem you are intending to bloom has to have already been on the stage for at least a turn. So the evolve rule is the same in hololive. But you can follow the following bloom paths. You can either go from a debut to a first, which is like pretty normal if you are from a Pokemon. That's like a basic to a first stager. You can also go from first to first, which is kind of funky and it messes with people's brains a little bit. This is probably the most relevant non-Pokemon mechanic in the game that is, commonly used, I would say. You can also go from first to second, and that is a pretty common path as well. It's just stage 1 to stage 2, very basic stuff. And you can also do second to second, although I will say most people do not do this except for specific decks that want to do second to second. Most decks do not do this, I would say. It's just an option you can do if you find yourself in the position to be able to do that. Other rules. You can only bloom from the same Holloman once per turn, so you can't double evolve the same person. Same rules as Pokemon, really. And you also cannot bloom if the resulting Holomem has less max HP than their current damage, which I think is something Pokemon does not have. Or maybe it does, but then there's like no penalty for it. I'm not so sure about that. I'm not a Pokemon expert at this point anymore. But the most famous example I have in my brain anyway, because I am very Polka-pilled, is Buzz Polka blooming into First Polka, which I'm currently in the way. Let me move myself out of the way here for that. But yeah, if you look at Buzz Polka's HP, it's 240. She is quite big. She's one of the biggest cards in the game, HP-wise. And yeah, she is a first Holo member. So she can, in fact, bloom into the first Polka Vanilla, or I guess this is the idle one. But she only has 110 HP, which means that if your Buzz Polka has accrued more than 110 damage, you can't bloom into this path. Now, you might be wondering, why would you ever want to do that? That seems so terrible. But let me tell you as a Polka player that sometimes you just want to do this because you don't want your Buzz Polka to be KO'd and lose 2 life for it. That part is really important because sometimes you just need to not lose the life. If your opponent misses like a KO on the Buzz Polka and like can't do any damage to it, you often want to transition into the non-Buzz in order to reduce the amount of life you lose. Buzz Holomem also commonly going into seconds will have this issue too. A lot of Buzz Holomem have over 200 HP and a lot of seconds do not have that much. So that is a common problem faced by Buzz decks, is that you will oftentimes not be able to bloom your Buzz Holomem into the second if you were using it to successfully tank an incoming attack. But anyway, that's a pretty rare scenario. I think normally you're not supposed to do that, but it's just a case they did cover for in case you ever thought about it doing it. All right, putting myself back up to the top. Moving on. Next is Collab Holomem. This is the main feature of this card game compared to other card games. Now, in order to collab, you need to do the following steps. Number 1, you need to put the top card of your deck into Holo Power, which is the little space above your deck right here. Some people also put it under the Oshi card. That's totally fine. Or they put it above the Oshi card. As long as it's separate from the deck and you can tell that it's not the deck, it's usually fine. So you can kind of put that wherever you want. Next, you move the column you want to collab into the collab stage from your back. And that's pretty much it. You then follow the following rules. Okay, you can collab once per turn. So even if you collab and you move the column back somehow, you can't collab again. You have to be able to pay the cost of collabing, otherwise you can't collab. Basically, that means you can't collab if you have 0 cards deck. So that's pretty rare, but I mean, maybe it'll happen in some game state. And also, the Collab Holomem you just put there cannot baton pass. So once you put it there, it is there until the end of your opponent's turn and the next reset phase you have. So be careful about this. Regarding collab effects, I think I covered this in the effect video, but the collab effects happen after you collab. Like after you perform this mechanic, you then execute the collab effect. So more on that in the effect video. You can go back and watch that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. As for collabing itself, basically what it does is get you another body on the board that can attack, but it also gives your opponent another body to hit while they're attacking. So your life can reduce faster, but you can also take their life faster, or you can use some other kind of effect or something. Sorry about that, out of notification, but I'm not going to edit that out. So moving on into the next part. We have use Oshi Skill or SP Oshi Skill. This is a skill that's always available, like I said. It's determined by your Oshi holomem. The Oshi Skill is usually a weaker version of your, holomem's main gimmick, and it's once per turn. Pretty much all of them once per turn. And the SP Oshi Skill is something you can use once per game. You need to use an SP Oshi Skill marker. It's basically a V-star ability. And your SP Oshi Skill marker can pretty much be anything as long as you and your opponent agree on it. So go wild with that one. First, you need to declare the skill you want to use. So whether it's like Little Wild Rabbits here on Pecora's card or Lucky Rabbit, which is the bottom skill, you then need to pay the cost in holo power from the top of your accumulated holo power by archiving them. Importantly, you cannot choose what cards become archived. It is just in the order in which you put them there. So over the course of 3 turns, for example, you collab 3 times, you dump top card, dump top card, dump top card. The 2 cards you would archive for Little Wild Rabbits here would be the 3rd card you archived, or the 3rd card you holo powered, and the 2nd card you holo powered, because they're on top of the 1st card you holo powered, and that card will stay there. So you don't get to choose what cards you take from your holo power. So just whatever falls in there, falls in there. It's very similar to like prize cards in Pokemon. Those are cards that you're putting away into a separate stack of cards that you're not going to be able to get back until later when you use them for cost or you do something specific. In Pokemon's case, it's getting a knockout, and in our case, it would be using a Oshi skill. Then you just carry out the effect of the skill. So finally, you just resolve the skill, and importantly, even if you cannot apply the effect, you can still use and pay the cost for the skill. So unlike Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is a resolution-based game, you need to be able to resolve the effect. This is more Pokemon-like, where you can just use the skill even if it doesn't have like a viable target, or you can't even do it. This really only matters if you're using an Oshi holomem that isn't really aligned with your actual game plan. The ones I can think of are things like, let's see, like, no, I guess that's fine. I guess it would be something like, this one, right? Pecora. I'm going to use Pecora. So, the Little Wild Rabbits is a skill that moves all the green cheer from your downed holomem to any of your other holomem in any way you like. If you don't have any green cheer, you can still use this. It just won't have an effect because you don't have any green cheer, So that is just an example. You would never do that in a real game because you're trying to get as much value of this as you can. It's just that some decks in the current format for JP, they use non-game plan central Oshi holomem, and they sometimes need to use the skills even if they have no resolution. So that is just something that happens in the current format for Japan. You're going to eventually get it in EN. Just keep that in mind. All right, moving on. We have support cards, trainer cards. Very understandable for Pokemon. Like I said in the types of cards video, the limited support card is only once per turn. So even if you have multiple limited cards, you can only play one of those in the turn. And in this case, I'm playing Nodoka, who is a draw 3 card. Very basic stuff. Also, you can't play limited support card on your first turn going first. Same thing as Pokemon. They pretty much just copied that verbatim. And you can also play support cards even if their effect would not completely resolve. So, for example, normal PC here, if you choose to use it, you can search your deck. But even if you have a debut holomem in your deck, you don't have to reveal it. It's the same thing as Nest Ball from Pokemon. So if you're coming from Pokemon, this should all feel very familiar. If you're not, sorry to say, but basically you can lie to each other. Or you can fail searches. That is something you can do. Yeah. Importantly, though, you cannot use the normal PC if you have a full backstage, because that's public information, so your opponent knows you're not going to be able to resolve this card. So you wouldn't be able to play it in that scenario. Most other cards don't have to do this, though. Like, if you only have 2 cards in deck and you use Nodoka, you will still draw the 2 cards. It's just like, oh well, like that's just the way the game works. So, yep. Moving on, here we have, I'm going to skip baton passing because that's pretty easy to understand if you're from Pokemon. But I'm going to move on into the performance phase. So we're finally getting into the art stuff here. Now, just like in Pokemon, you skip this phase on your first turn going first. So no attacking on your first turn going first. I mean, same for Yu-Gi-Oh, right? You don't get a battle phase in turn 1 also. So this is a phase where you attack your opponent's center and collab with your center and collab's arts. You can choose the order in which your holomem attack. So maybe you want your Collab to attack first, or maybe you want your center to attack first. And sometimes the order actually matters, so you do have to pay attention to that a little bit. In some games, anyway. Not all games will be like that, but sometimes you will need to pay attention to it. So the order of operations here, when you start to declare an arts, is first you need to target and name your arts. So let's say you want to use an attack and target your opponent's center holomem. You would do all that first. You need to be able to pay the cheer cost, of course. That's nothing too fancy. I think I covered that already. Then you need to resolve any ability text from the arts. So any ability text resolves before the main damage goes through. And that will be important in a sec when I pull up the other part of this. And then after that, you finally carry out your damage calculation for your arts. So all of that is to say, just make sure all of your effect resolution happens before your actual damage goes through. And your opponent can interact with that, maybe depending on their Oshi holomem or whatever. So there we go. Now, what happens in the downing process? Well, let's talk about downing. Downed is a status which occurs as soon as the holomem receives more damage than they have max HP. That is to say, once they have 0 HP, they are downed. And here's the order of operations for that. First, you need to reduce your life appropriately, whether it's 1 or 2 or 0 life reduction. That would happen. Then you need to reveal the top left card and send to another holomem on the stage according to the number of life you reduced. So if you reduced 0 life, you don't do this, obviously. If you reduced 1 life, you would take 1 card. If you reduced 2 life, you take 2 cards. Pretty simple stuff. Finally, you move all of the cards attached to and under the downed holomem, and they get moved to the archive. All right. So, barring any weird effects that you have on your cards or anything like that, you would move them all to your archive list. Now, you might be wondering, all right, that's cool and all, but some cards like this, so we say first, say that it deals 20 damage to your back holomem, I think. Opponent's back holomem, but it doesn't reduce their life if they are downed. In this case, they would take 0 life damage and they would just lose the holomem and all that stuff. So that is a case in which they would down but not lose life. Otherwise, all the effects will reduce life, unless it says this exact clause. Now, you might be wondering, all right, cool. Now, back to the whole effects before arts damage thing. Here's a card that doesn't exist in your format yet, but will exist eventually, and maybe a couple other cards before this do this also. I don't really remember. This is the first one I came to mind anyway. I'm going to introduce to you Debut Lami from Japan. Her attack is a 20 damage attack that also does 10 special damage anywhere on your opponent's board. So, this is important because let's say your opponent has a center holomem with 10 HP remaining. If you choose to target that holomem with Lami here, the 10 special damage, if you target that holomem also, would go through first, which would then down them. But it wouldn't take any life because Lami prevents that. So you would never do that, obviously, if you're playing this deck. You would always put the 10 somewhere else. However, in the case that you do this accidentally because you just didn't pay attention, you would lose out on reducing your opponent's life. So be very careful about the way you organize your damage and your attacks. Don't get caught by the rules here. And yeah, I like I said, this is the one I came to mind. I'm sure there are other cards that do the same thing, but otherwise, it is what it is. All right. Finally, we have the end phase and win conditions. So, during the end phase, you just declare, I'm finished with my performance step. It's the end of my turn. Go ahead. But there's a very rare scenario where if it is your turn and you have an empty center as the result of recoil damage from, say, Stone X or Upao, the Kanata mascot, you need to replace your center holomem with a active back holomem here. Now, obviously, if you don't have one, you don't do this. But, yeah, I think this is an exceedingly rare situation to be in. It has almost never occurred in my experience of playing this game. But it is a case that exists, so they covered it on their quick start guide. And also importantly, I just want to get this through to everybody who's coming from Pokemon. Unlike Pokemon, you do not replace your center once it is emptied, except for during your end phase and your reset phase. That means if your opponent downs your center holomem during their main performance, or during their main step, and enters their performance step, they will not be able to hit a center because there will not be a center. So that's another little optimization thing for you to take care of while you're executing your game plan. All right. Now, here are the ways to win. Well, one, you can win if you reduce your opponent's life to 0. That's pretty standard. 2, you can also win if your opponent has no hollow member remaining on their stage. This is the same as Pokemon's no more Pokemon left rule. And finally, if your opponent cannot complete their draw phase, they also lose. That's the same in most card games. Just like in Pokemon, you can continue to play with 0 cards in deck, and you can even play cards that require you to draw cards out of your deck. They just won't have an effect. However, you need to put at least 1 card in your deck by the next time your draw phase rolls around. Otherwise, you're going to lose. So be careful with that. And I think that's pretty much everything I have to tell you about today's video here about the how to play. I did feel like I rushed through it, but honestly, this is already 25 minutes, so maybe I didn't rush as fast as I thought. There was a lot to talk about. Go ahead and check out the quick start guide. I'm going to link it below in case you need to see it. I'll also link some more resources here and there if you want to look at those as well. So after this, I'm going to start talking about decks and also how to play the decks, because I think something that is currently lacking in the content creation sphere is like how to actually just play the deck. I think there's a lot of like exhibitions and like, you know, reaction stuff, openings, all that kind of stuff. There's even like a couple how to play videos that aren't mine from people who are much more popular than I am. But in terms of like, how do you actually play this deck, or what's the main goal of this deck? Like, what are we doing here? I'm going to start making videos like that so you can actually inform yourselves on what deck you'd like to build and run in this wonderful game of Hololive. So until then, I'll catch you later. See you out.